there's the open source project that, yeah, it became super famous. And at first, the company that built that open source product was a consultancy, but they realized that there is actually a product they are building, and that's why they went and built DBT Labs. And we are the maintainers of the open source tool, but we also offer a SaaS tool for yeah, enterprise and team customers who really, you know, want to get started in lightning speed with DBT. Where did the whole idea of DBT come from? Like, nothing would have been possible without the big growth of, you know, cloud data warehouses. But in the beginning of the time, when there was no DBT, and something that we are still seeing in many companies, is when you start building and you have these basically unlimited compute and you have these great BI tools, you're building a lot of, you know, in like dependency models, and there's no way to really get your hands on it, right? Like, people start working in silos and you end up with something that is just not very, yeah, maintainable for data teams. Yeah, and that's what we see oftentimes. And the result often is that your stakeholders, when you run dashboards that are critical to the business or critical to your marketing operation, you will constantly run into problems that maybe the data is not fresh, or the data doesn't look right, or something did break, and it's very hard to debug. And the whole idea of DBT is to kind of bring structure to that chaos, right? So with DBT, we are kind of promoting data analysts to work in a software engineering way. Like, we are trying to bring best practices from software engineering into the data world, particularly to users who have not been exposed to software engineering so much. Like, a data analyst, he grows with, you know, writing a little bit of Python and R, and you know, then calculating metrics, right? And we think at DBT it's a bit easier to teach data analysts a little bit about software engineering than it is to teach data engineers about the business, which would be the other route. But yeah, enough of that. So we sit on top of these cloud data platforms, and what we promote ultimately is 4 fundamental functionalities in our product: develop, test, documentation, and deploy. And I'm going to talk about each one of those in the next couple of minutes. All right. So let's start with develop. That's the one thing I want you all to take away tonight from this presentation, because DBT is built around simple select statements. A select statement alone gets you started in DBT, and DBT's job is to persist or store any kind of select statement that you build. And with a select statement, we build business logic. We are able to define a number of different materializations of how we want to persist stuff. There's views, there's tables, there's incremental models, and so on and so forth. But it's very important that you don't have to know about database admin languages like data definition language or data manipulation languages. So when you write a particular SQL select statement, you save it as a file. Here in my example, you see the order SQL. And when you run DBT, what DBT is going to do in the first place is going to wrap it in this needed statement that you need to persist that data. Yeah, for now that is kind of sounds simple, but there's definitely more to it. One of the things I want to mention, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, is that since a couple of days we are now able also to write the same things in Python. So DBT now supports Python as their second language, but my presentation will evolve mostly around the concept of SQL. Like, I think right now we have 0.003 of global DBT projects using Python at the moment, and we're just at the start, and it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen on there. But there is a little bit of Python that makes our SQL a little bit more powerful. And I don't know if some have experience with that. There's a little black magic in the DBT library that we call Ginger, which is a templating language, and that allows us to do like very, very, very cool things. And the very, very coolest thing in DBT, and which is really the kind of the gateway into the DBT tonic way of doing things, is what we call the ref function. And you see that in my example that I was presenting earlier, I replaced the declarative from statement, like it said from analytics dot whatever, like schema dot orders, Now it's wrapped in staging orders. It's now wrapped into this ref function. So I'm referencing to a table. And the one very, very, very cool thing of Ginger, what it does is when we work as developers, we want to abstract what we develop locally from what's running in production, right? So we want to very easily promote our code through different stages. In the simplest world, we would call them development and production, or development and analytics. And through that Ginger templating language and using those macros, we are able to make this very easy, right? Like in my local sandbox environment, my environment will tell me, write this always to development. While when we promote into production, Ginger and the magic behind it will make sure that my code will automatically promote it into the production environment after like my pull request has been reviewed or my code has been reviewed and things have been done correctly. Only then or in production, the right environment, will my output be produced there. And that is already quite a game-changing experience for a lot of the people that started using DBT. Another thing that the ref function does, which is very, very interesting, and we dive into this in a second, is the concept of referencing and building dependencies within my data graph. You've seen that earlier, like that big chaos of, nodes and things, and then finding out, oh, there's a select statement that's coming from that table, but that logic is coming from another table. All that becomes visible with DBT. We know exactly which model is built upon, is built from which logic. And yeah, you see like a little example at the bottom. But I think it's actually the nicest thing if I just jump into what we call the DBT docs world, right? Because that's how you're going to see this. Like, this is how this should look, right? Like, what we want as data analysts have a clear vision or view on how data is being transformed. We have different nodes in our docs, right? That's something that we call sources. And these green sources, they represent all data that is flying into my data warehouse. Like, that is not something DBT does. That is something that Fivetran does, or Stitch. I don't know which EL tool you use, but from there we pick the data up, and the blue nodes is exactly what we are writing in our SQL, right? Like we're writing SQL models that will do something with the data. Here in this simple example is basically using a lot of staging data to create an orders table. But I will talk about this in a second a bit more. I can also view documentation on each object, right? So in this orders table, I want to be able that anybody in my company can go into my docs and understand what's going on in this table, right? Like, what are the different column values? What does that even mean, ordered at? Well, it's a timestamp, right? Or what is the order ID? And you see another little thing here that will lead me to the to my second point in this chapter, which is testing, right? Like, we are able to define tests, which is a very fundamental concept in software engineering, but hasn't been in data for a long time, at least, especially for small teams. So with that said, I said auto documentation. Another thing that is happening through the ref function is that when you run DBT, actually, you don't have to worry about which model needs to run before that other model can be built, right? Like, DBT knows just by having this dependency, it knows at runtime in which sequence it has to execute your models. Cool. By the way, I'm on this Q&A. I don't know if people are on the Slido. If you have questions, I have one eye on it. Yeah, feel free to leave questions there. I will try to answer them at the end. Awesome. So docs and tests, they're all in one place. We have a concept of a configuration file, which is YAML. And in that YAML file, we can define the description and the tests. It's all close to your code base. It's not happening in some other place. It needs documentation should happen close to your business logic. And that is what the idea of having those dedicated YAML files is, that we put in our same project. Testing, I said it earlier, we're investing in docs and in writing great business logic. We want to make sure our tests, our business model and our SQL is delivering good results and results we trust in. And a good way to do this is to constantly test our data. dbt comes with a couple of tests that you can use, but what's awesome about the dbt community, since so many people use it, every dbt project is its own package and it can use other packages. So especially in the testing world, once you dive into dbt, you will see so many interesting packages that deal with the topic of question of testing, and you're going to be able to use other people's tests in your own model. You could also define your own tests in dbt. That is sometimes like a very first more advanced usage of it. You have a particular dashboard for the management team that has a very specific logic that defines, that is very unique to your business, and you want to test it. And you can do this by writing another SQL select statement. So everything, as I said earlier, basically everything is a SQL select statement in dbt. Cool. Yeah, that is again on testing. So we want to preserve quality. We are having assumptions against our data. And these three parts that really make dbt so great for everyone. Just a few words on deployment, because we want to make it easy. You can run dbt open source, of course, but imagine if you had other things to do, right? And I like, from my experience, the data team, they never lack work. They are usually overworked. And what if you hadn't all this overhead? You could use dbt Cloud. This is our cloud product where you basically get started super easily. You don't have to worry about, I don't know, fitting in dbt into your, like how to run it on Kubernetes, for example, or how to run it, like how should I run it, right? Everything is in cloud, and cloud is not kind of a closed system. It's not a closed shop. You could still integrate it into a larger scheme of other orchestration systems that you would run, like Airflow or Dexter, or I don't know what you guys already have experience with. Yeah, but it removes definitely this overhead of installing and onboarding people on the right version of dbt, teaching them how to use CLI and Git workflows, because all of this is very seamless in dbt Cloud. And I'm just looking at the time. I think I have 13 more minutes, or not even, right? I want just dive into my my kind of writing dbt tonic code and what we mean by that, what dbt tonic actually is. So, Carolina, all good?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I see some questions. Origins use case in here. Are these questions that just came in?
Yeah.
What were the reasons to make dbt open source? That's a good
question at the end if you want.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Let's do this. All right. So dbt Cloud, super quick. It has three components. I have a text editor, you see it here, and kind of a VS Code file structure on the left-hand side. This is the Git repository I'm connected to, and everything needs to happen in a commit workflow. So right now I'm on a demo branch of my own, where I can commit and push to. I was experimenting a bit with Python. But yeah, I can write arbitrary SQL in here, and it has another component, which is the command line. So we have a little bit of CLI. You can only run dbt commands in there, but you can run them and make it very accessible to everyone. And then I have my SQL runner under the hood. So right now I'm connected to a Snowflake database, and I'm writing this select hello data punks that will run my query and push it down to my Snowflake instance. And yeah, you see, voila, it returns this little data frame. Yes, you can, just to illustrate what I mentioned earlier for you to understand, you see my second line, I just compiled this bit of Ginger, and what dbt executes actually against my Snowflake instance is not that cryptic reference. It's converting it into proper, nice, simple SQL, right? So if I would run this now, it will select that string across my staging customers table. But talking about staging customers, right? Like this is where we start. This is where it all starts. We are structuring a project. And the DBT tonic way to do these things, we are separating two different concerns usually. We have a staging layer. You see this at the left-hand side. I think it must be super small, and I try to make it. I hope this is better for everyone. It's going to be difficult for me though, because my screen is just kind of, yes, I hope that's better. So we have a staging environment. Like this is where everything starts. This is where everything lands. We have two types of nodes in here. We have our source nodes, the green things that you saw earlier in my graph, right? Like these are the tables that are being loaded by some system. Like here in this case, I have some e-commerce data, and it says loader manual, but this could be Fivetran, Airbyte, Airflow, whatever you use to load your data. And then I have the tables, right, that are being persisted via these tools. I have customers, orders, order items. And from here on, I'm able to start documenting and testing my data. Okay, so in staging, I will have a one-to-one relation. DBT tonic, right? What are we actually saying ultimately? Let me pull up that slide again. I always think about it in this way. Every code is read much more often than it is written. And that's actually really true, right? So what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for this moment that you're writing your code, or are you optimizing for the person who in 1 or 2 years is going to reread your code and say, actually, this was pretty great written, and I had no problem understanding what that person before me did. So similar to Pythonic, DBT code is also DB tonic. And yeah, what we are trying to implement is not a rule, right? Like I'm not saying this is how you should do it. It's more like a guideline and best practices that we have accumulated over different projects that we have run, over use cases that we have seen. And yeah, I will later on share a couple of resources that will get you started. They're here in the background about checklists, DBT style guides, and structuring your code. But I'm already in the structuring your code world in my little demo. So we're starting here. There's a one-to-one relation. I showed you this earlier in my graph. I will do this again. So what I want is that every object that comes from my source is mapped into a staging table, right? In this staging tables, what we usually do. Let me pick up my code. Let's take staging orders. What we're usually doing is we are organizing the data in the right way. So I have some IDs usually that I work with. I have some properties or measures that I clean, right? I want everything to be a float, not some, super long, some value. And I have timestamp that I deal with. Okay, so we work with a CTE that calls all my source data. Then I do some transformation step here. I'm renaming, reorganizing the data. And in the end, I always finish with a select star statement. That is kind of how the skeleton of a good DBT SQL file sort of looks like. Okay, awesome. I hope that was clear so far. So we are on the staging layer. We have mapped our source data, and now we can start, building some interesting stuff. And this is where our MATS layer comes in, right? So in MATS, we will put all models which combine and heavily transform our data. This is where your business logic will kind of be defined and become like a living thing that you're gonna develop over a lot of time. So I was very centrally speaking about the orders graph. So we can see this now here at the bottom, the lineage in here. So you can see, right? The orders table is a great example. The orders table has a very complicated way how we are defining them. And that contains information from orders, from order items, products, locations, supplies, right? And we are in a DBT tonic way. What we would do, similar to our source, we will of course call individually every source again. It's not about writing few lines of code. Nobody from us is paid by the amount of code lines that we are producing, right? Like we are paid for maintenance long term. So that's why we are usually defaulting into the most readable way that help people to understand what is going on here. So I'm loading all my data, and then only then I start organizing my transformations in very iterative steps. So here I have basically I have a couple more actually. I have multiple steps, and in each step we do one thing well. So here we do a summary on the order items. Here we do a summary on the order supplies. We join, and we come up with a final statement that is ultimately finished off with a select star statement. And that ultimately will help you really to manage all your things. There's more I could talk about, a lot more about naming conventions, SQL styles, but this is kind of the core. And I think this is I wanted to make you feel like, okay, I think I can now get started with my DBT project. And looking at the time and your questions, I will stop here.